Hi, everyone. Let's just jump into our mini lesson today, which is on introductions. All right. So introduction should be strategic. All writing should be strategic. And when we compose with a strategy, what that means is that we are thoughtful about what goes into our writing, meaning what content needs to be included so that we can meet our rhetorical goals. All right. And so for an arguing a position paper, an introduction needs to cover several areas because an introduction sets the context for the rest of the paper. So after the title, the introduction is going to help you to establish for readers what's at stake and why it matters. All right. And it also establishes what the topic is about and why it's controversial, okay? That allows you as a writer as well to kind of have a guide to return to as you write and as you outline to make sure that you're meeting the strategic goals you've set up for your introduction. So an introduction has a hook, and a hook needs to engage. So a hook in its best form should be specific and detailed, connecting to the topic itself that is the basis for the controversy. All right, so it connects to the issue rather than remains broad. So you want to avoid hooks that are very general, like for decades now, people have been concerned about mental health or the human condition is one that needs to be interrogated and cared for, right? So neither of those are specific enough to a context that is going to set up the paper for success, because you want your readers to immediately begin identifying with what you have to say, okay? So you want a hook that engages and identifies the general topic. So from there, you give that background information and then move on to establishing the rationale, meaning why is the topic important to consider, okay? Why is it that readers should spend time pouring through your argument, paying close attention to your commentary, your analysis, the points you bring up to support your thesis. And this thesis is where you state your position on the issue. So let's look a little closer at the thesis, because without an effective thesis, meaning without it being narrow to the topic, so it's sufficiently narrow and sufficiently taking a side on the controversy and establishing why that matters, it's very difficult to actually write a paper that's going to pass muster. Meaning the goal of an arguing a position paper, whether it be to persuade, so that others agree with your view, or whether it to be to get others to at least start considering other viewpoints more thoughtfully, the goal can't be reached if you don't have a strong thesis. So spend some time here, spend some time in the introduction. All right. So a thesis, again, should be appropriately narrowed, meaning it needs to be specific enough to the topic. It can't be something, I'm gonna give you a broad thesis on foster youth, because the following introduction that we're gonna take a quick look at is about foster youth support services. And a broad thesis on foster youth support services would go something like, foster youth need extra support in college. That's it, right? Or foster youth are a special student population that deserves attention, okay? Now, You also want to have the thesis to be clear. So clarity comes from several areas. The first is location. The thesis always needs to come at the end of the introduction. So whether that be an introduction that is a single paragraph, or for longer papers, an introduction that might be, several pages in, the location of the thesis matters because that's where readers are expecting it, right? When we write within a genre, and here the genre is an argument paper and arguing a position particularly, the rules or conventions for that genre dictate where that thesis is going to be most effectively placed. So you want it at the end of the introduction. You also want the language to be clear. So that means using more specific verbs, using more specific language. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. Concision is equally important because if you are too wordy, your readers will get lost in the point. Finally, you need to define why your position matters, right? So if you have watched our week 2 live stream FAQ, you will have noted that the data privacy protections that the authors are asking for during the pandemic matter because it's for the greater good, right? The businesses should suspend business as usual online in data collection because it's for the greater good, right? That because it's for the greater good is why it matters. All right, so our deep dive into an introduction is coming from a recent chapter that I actually just finished writing this week alongside my writing partner and research colleague, Paul Bueller. We are co-directors and co-founders of the Writing in Foster Youth Alliance on UCR's campus. And this chapter about our Writing Alliance and the services we provide to foster youth is being published in a series for innovations in higher education, teaching and learning in a volume called Human Rights in Higher Education, International Perspectives in Social Justice Programs. Okay, so there's the citation. This isn't out yet. It's going to be coming out in a book form in 2021. So you have a sneak preview here. And just to give you a sense of things before we move into it, we started researching and writing this paper a year ago. And last summer was when I actually started drafting the paper itself, but I had, we had developed outlines and split up tasks because we wrote this collaboratively. And the piece you're going to see right now is from my my portion that I wrote. Okay, so here it is. And let's go ahead. Let me collapse this. Here we go. So we're going to start with the hook, and I've used different font colors to help to identify each of these features. Now, this is an introduction that is written in APA format because of the needs of the publication, what they require of me. So just like I require of you MLA format, I've had to use APA format and really learn how to do so that I am aligning with the standards expected of me. Okay, so you'll see that the citation style is slightly different, but this is what a peer-reviewed scholarly introduction looks like. External and systemic factors face college attending foster youth in the US. Lack of familial support, placement in lower performing K-12 schools, high levels of school turnover, higher rates of trauma and abuse, resulting in mental health issues and cognitive and other disabilities, and lack of soft skills, knowledge, and advocacy training. So, bam, there's my declarative statement. That's my hook. I am coming straight in, a very specific and detailed hook that gets us right into the topic that I'm taking up. right? So now we have this transition, these circumstances, right? That's the transitional phrase to background information that helps to establish the importance of this topic. These circumstances directly contribute to the plight of foster youth and their categorization as a higher risk population than first generation or low income students outside of foster care, right? Foster care students are less likely to graduate too. And then I go into the distinctions between foster youth versus first generation students who have not been foster youth versus general population students overall who are not foster youth as well, okay? And it's necessary to provide this data because if I am arguing a case that foster youth require more support, I have to begin to introduce a rationale for that, right? So here is my rationale for the why we're gonna move into what matters about it, right? So intentional focused attention on the special student population is necessary from the perspective of equity, right? To address the disparity between groups in college matriculation and graduation. So if foster youth are coming to college in fewer numbers, and when they're here, not graduating at the same rates as other students, right? Then attention needs to be paid to this group because we need to have equitable access, right, to learning. And that establishes for us the stakes. But it doesn't form the thesis statement, it builds up to it. And the last sentence is the thesis statement, right? From a position of social justice, foster youth deserve the opportunity to earn a college degree, a degree which in the United States correlates with increased potential for upward social mobility, okay? So the why it matters is that from a position of social justice, right? They deserve the opportunity, okay? So that is the thesis. And when you can set yourself up with a strong introduction, you will more likely than not succeed as long as you focus on essentially trying to prove that argument. You will have a strong paper, okay? And one last thing, when we return back to the thesis, we see that it's appropriately narrowed, right? I'm talking about social justice. I'm talking about extra support in college. The location is at the end of that section. The language is clear and articulate. It is not vague. It's concise. And I have the why it matters, all right? So as an introduction overall, we have a hook that engages with by using data. It identifies the general topic, which is foster youth in college and supports needed based on matriculation and graduation rates, and establishes the rationale for why we need to be considering this, right? Which is that there's a disparity in these graduation rates between foster youth and first generation and general population students. Okay. The one final point I'd like to make as I offer this mini lesson is I often get questions about, where is my, I often get questions about, oh, can I cite others in my papers and in my introduction particularly? And the answer is yes. If you are sourcing information or expressing ideas that need support or that come from other people, especially because you're entering into this field, you're not an expert yourself, right? you need to cite other people, just as I did. And I cite a lot, okay? So when I offer you requirements of sources to include in your paper in terms of how many, that's really a suggested minimum. If I don't see that suggested minimum, then you're automatically going to be not really doing the sort of background research needed to write an effective paper, but you're also not going to be scoring as high because you haven't met the paper requirements. Now, not every paper requires this much citation, even just in the introduction. You know, we offered in our 20-page paper total, I believe 2 single-spaced pages of sources in the bibliography were listed. So this is, you know, a paper that's being published. It is not a paper written for a composition course, but the expectation remains nevertheless that you need to support your ideas with evidence that comes from credible sources, and that when you are crafting, you want to consider, especially, you know, as a hook or an evidence and body paragraphs, what would be the best evidence to help make your point. I can't just say that foster youth graduate less and don't even go to college as much as other populations. I can't say that if I don't have support for that, right? It wouldn't be credible to my readers. I'm trying to persuade others to adopt a program like ours. If I can't provide numbers and I can't provide anecdotes and people who have been studying in the field a long time, I'm not going to be effective, and neither will you in yours. So I hope you've enjoyed this mini lesson on introductions, and we will convene again another time. Thank you and have a great day.